Mother-in-law made me a cup of coffee which had a very strange smell. "Especially for you, my dearie," she said. I smiled and answered, "How sweet," and swapped the mugs quietly with my husband, who was humiliating me for years. 60 minutes later, Part 1. "Especially for you, my dear," my mother-in-law Margaret beamed as she placed the steaming mug in front of me. Her voice was sweet, almost too sweet, like honey masking something bitter. I smiled, though my stomach clenched. "So sweet," I said, keeping my tone light. I wrapped my hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into my palms, but there was something off. The aroma rising from the cup wasn't the rich, comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee. It carried a strange, almost chemical-like tang, something metallic that tingled in the back of my throat before I even took a sip. Across the table, my husband Steve barely looked up from his phone, one arm draped over the back of his chair, his usual air of arrogance suffocating the space between us. "Drink up," Margaret chirped, her eyes twinkling. "I made it just the way you like it." She had never cared how I liked my coffee. For 7 years, I had sat at this table, enduring her constant condescension, her not-so-subtle digs, and her smothering influence over Steve. She had always been the quiet puppeteer, pulling the strings of my marriage, reinforcing my husband's belief that he was above me, that I was lucky to be with him, that he was doing me a favor, and Steve. He fed off her approval, a golden boy who could do no wrong in her eyes, while I was the outsider who could never measure up. My fingers tightened around the handle. I glanced at Steve. He didn't even notice the way his mother's eyes flicked toward my cup, the slight tension in her jaw as she waited. Why is she watching so closely? Then I remembered. This wasn't the first time something had seemed off about what she had given me. 2 months ago, after a family dinner, I had spent the entire night curled in pain on the bathroom floor, my stomach cramping violently. Margaret had played the concerned mother-in-law role flawlessly. "Maybe you have a sensitive stomach, dear. Perhaps you should watch what you eat." And Steve. He had just rolled his eyes, blaming me for ruining the evening with my drama. Another time, it was an odd dizziness after tea at her house. My head swam, my body feeling sluggish and uncooperative. Margaret had patted my hand. "Oh dear, maybe you're just dehydrated." And Steve had left, teasing me about not being able to handle a simple cup of tea. But now she was watching too closely, waiting too intently. I felt my heartbeat quicken as my mind raced. What is in this coffee? Margaret's lips twitched, her expression carefully neutral. She wants me to drink it. She expects me to drink it. A quiet, slow breath. Then, without hesitation, I shifted my mug closer to Steve's seat. I leaned forward, feigning interest in my phone, my fingers carefully wrapping around the handle of his coffee cup instead. Then, with a quick, deliberate movement, I switched the mugs. The ceramic barely made a sound against the tablecloth. My action was smooth, practiced, because I had learned to survive in this house by being careful. Steve didn't notice. He was still scrolling through his phone, his usual indifference on full display. I picked up the cup meant for him and took a slow sip, black, no sugar, just the way he always drank it. Steve finally lifted his cup, the one Margaret had placed so carefully in front of me, and took a sip without a second thought. Margaret's smile faltered, just for a second, just a flicker of something in her eyes, panic, fear, shock, before she schooled her expression, back into a pleasant, motherly mask. Steve, oblivious as ever, set the mug down, his fate sealed in a single casual sip, and I watched. I waited. Steve sighed loudly, rubbing his temple as he scrolled through his phone, his usual arrogance still intact. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each second since he had taken his first sip of coffee. Margaret's eyes darted toward him every few moments, her fingers curling tightly around the edge of the tablecloth. She wasn't watching me anymore, her attention had shifted entirely to her son. I sat back, feigning ignorance, forcing a casual smile as I took another slow sip from Steve's cup. He exhaled sharply, his brow furrowing. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He blinked a few times, rubbing his forehead. "I don't know, I just feel a little off." I took another sip of coffee, my pulse steady, my hands resting easily on the table. "Maybe you should drink some water." Margaret's nails dug into the tablecloth. Steve started, but his sentence broke off abruptly. He swallowed hard, shifting in his chair. Then his face twisted slightly, his jaw clenching as though suppressing a sudden wave of nausea. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Margaret pushed her chair back suddenly, the legs scraping against the polished floor. "Steve, maybe you should lie down," she said quickly, too quickly, as though she already knew exactly what was happening. My chest tightened, but I kept my face neutral. He groaned softly, shaking his head. "No, His breathing grew heavier, beads of sweat forming along his hairline. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass, his fingers unsteady. I stared at him, the realization settling deep in my bones. She knew something was in that coffee. Margaret stood up abruptly, moving toward him, as though she could physically pull him away from the situation she had created. "I'll get you something, honey," she said. "Maybe a cold cloth." She was panicking, not out of concern for her son, but because she was losing control of the situation. Steve clenched his jaw, waving her off. "I just need a minute," he muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. I leaned forward, watching Margaret carefully. "I don't understand," I said, feigning innocence. "Steve, you just drank the same coffee your mother made for me. If I'm fine, why aren't you?" Margaret froze. The blood drained from her face. Steve, still sluggish, didn't immediately react to my words, but Margaret's breathing changed. I don't know," she stammered. "Maybe he's coming down with something." "Coming down with something?" I stared at her, my mind piecing everything together in a way that suddenly made my stomach turn. How many times had I been coming down with something over the last few years? How many times had I spent nights curled in pain, feeling like my body was betraying me, while Steve and Margaret looked on without an ounce of concern? But now it was him. Steve wiped his face, his movement slower. His skin had paled. He muttered something under his breath and stood up too fast. The moment he pushed himself away from the table, his body swayed unsteadily. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stumbled forward, grabbing onto the edge of the counter for balance. "Whoa," he muttered. "What the hell is going on?" Margaret was already moving, already trying to regain control. "Sweetheart, just sit down No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Let's call a doctor." Both of them froze. Steve shook his head, blinking rapidly. "It's nothing, I just need a second." He doesn't even realize how bad it is yet. Margaret's breathing had turned shallow. I could see the fear in her eyes now, full and undeniable. She didn't just look worried, she looked caught. And that's when I knew, this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a bad batch of coffee or a coincidence. Margaret had done something to that drink. And Steve, he was just now feeling what I had felt over and over again, the betrayal, the confusion, the sickness creeping through his body, slow at first, then undeniable. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced my expression to remain calm. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "I'll call an ambulance," I said. Steve waved me off again, but I saw it, the slight panic in his eyes, the way he wasn't in control anymore. Margaret shot forward, gripping his arm. "No, there's no need for that." I turned my gaze to her, and that's when I smiled. "Why not?" I asked softly. She flinched. She opened her mouth to respond, but I saw it in her eyes, she didn't have an answer. Because Margaret had spent years making me feel helpless, like I was imagining things, like I was weak. But I wasn't the weak one now. I folded my arms, tilting my head slightly. "Unless of course," I said slowly, watching her expression darken, "there's a reason you don't want a doctor to examine him." The room fell silent. Margaret stared at me, and for the first time in all the years I had known her, she looked afraid of me. Margaret's fear was palpable, her fingers twitching at her sides as she tried to maintain control over the situation, but it was slipping through her grasp fast. Steve was getting worse by the second. His normally upright posture had weakened, his shoulders slumping forward. His breathing was labored. He gritted his teeth, gripping the counter as if he were holding on to the last bit of stability he had left. But still, he refused to believe it. "I don't need a doctor," he muttered, his voice tight. Just give me a minute. Like, you can click on share more to see if there is a part 2.